Welcome back. As we earlier said, we're going to be taking a comprehensive look over one of the important items in culture, which is the Arab-Australian theatre. What is the story behind the bond between Arab and Australian theatre? How did it develop? And what were the steps taken to be able to create a kind of a mutual culture and drama between those two types of theatres? Of course, different cultures, different dramatic schools, and different theatrical theories and all that. We're going to be finding all about this and more with our prominent guest, Professor Dr. Mohamad Hashem. He's an Australian Egyptian award-winning international director and also radio and TV broadcaster in the UK and US, writer and researcher and professor of media. Good morning, Dr. Hashem.
Good morning, and thank you for having me back on this amazing building, and nice to see you again.
It's a real pleasure to have you. Today we're not going to be talking about media, but we're going to be talking about the theatre, international theatre. But when it comes to international theatre, we have a great legacy and history when it comes to theatre. But why in particular the Australian and Arab theatre? Was there a history and a bond before there were collaborations? What exactly is the story?
Well, actually, if you look at Australian history, there was a lot of Afghan, they're called cameleers in Australia in the 1800s that actually went to Australia and did a lot of the work in the desert back then. So there was a lot of, if you want to call it, Middle Eastern or Arab influence in Australia. But the Arab theatre in general in Australia hasn't been quite big. Not a lot of the Arabic-speaking people that go to Australia are interested in theatre, or they don't do much in that space in Australia. I did a lot of work in Australia over the last 20 years, talking about Arabic and Middle Eastern affairs, some of them, and some of them were just, you know, things like immigration, things about honour in the Middle East, trying to let the Australians know about the Arabic Middle Eastern culture. And a lot of that is music. So we have a guy there called Joseph Tawadros, who plays the oud. And that to Australia was a fascinating instrument. Even though it's sort of similar to the Western guitar, they love the sound of the Oriental sound. But I've done a lot of theatre, over 30 productions, not to do with the Middle East also. So I've done a mixture of things to do with Middle Eastern things or affairs and other things that are not. The last play I did in Australia about Middle Eastern affairs was called Sharaf, with a playwright called Michael Gray. He wrote the play and I directed it. And that was to do with honour. Things like honour, shame, these are things that are not really spoken that much about in the West. So they're very interested in...
It's a different culture. They have, I guess they have their own culture also, but in a different way.
Yes.
But when you wrote that particular theme of the play, was it really apprehensive? Did they really were in full recognition of those values when it comes to, you know, the honor, the shame, and all this? Yeah, how did they receive it?
They received it. It can come across a little bit strange because these are not things that are in the vernacular. They're not said all the time by Western people or Australian people. So I think the first thing you have to do in theatre as a director or writer is to find common ground. You have to find something that they can relate to, anybody in the theatre can relate to. The theatre is like going to an international airport, like me going to Italy now. So I get off the aeroplane and I get to Italy, everybody's speaking Italian, so I'm a bit frightened, I'm a bit standoffish. So I need somebody to come to me and say, hello, I speak English like you, or I speak Arabic like you. Make me feel welcome. Take me by the hand, and then slowly show me Rome. Take me out to the streets. So the theatre is the same. The first scene especially, you need to give them something relevant. If you're not going to give them something relevant, they're going to go straight into the heart or the, you know, the context of the idea. They will not connect. So when we do things about honour and shame, you need to give the audience something relevant first, something they can relate to. So then go, oh, okay, that's similar to my culture. And then slowly start to talk about the difference. So talk about what is the same first, the glue that binds us all, and then talk about the difference. That's really important. And there's a school called the Theatre of the Absurd, Labus, which I use a lot in my work, and Brecht. So these are two schools that are very strange. So they're very weird sort of theatre making. But the first rule we were taught when we studied theatre was make sure the first scene is very relatable. Have a dining table, have people eating, have a mother and a father. Get people to say, yes, that's me. Chekhov, a writer called Anton Chekhov, said the theatre is categorized in 3 phases. The first phase is, who are these people? What are we watching? By the middle of the play, a good theatre show the audience should turn around and say, I sort of recognize these people on stage. By the end of the show, if it's a good show, the audience should say, I am these people. They have to see themselves in the characters, in the storyline. So that's really, really important.
Right. The problem with Australia is that there are some nations and some continents, some countries that are cosmopolitan.
Yes.
There are lots. In Egypt is cosmopolitan. We could say that the United States is cosmopolitan. UK is cosmopolitan. But for a country or a continent like Australia, it's very rich in its own history and culture, and it's in nature, recognized, very distinguished with its own features, but not really that type of cosmopolitan, not open to international community in a way, because they're so closed on their culture, or that's how we think, because and that is one great proof that it is not open to other cultures, is that we do not know much about the Australian community. So how do you describe the Australian community? Is it an environment that would accept strangers, other nationalities? How would they could be in contact with different people of different cultures?
Yes. Well, it's great you asked that question. I just did a play in Denver, Colorado in America, and I wrote the play about Australian characters who was in prison. So these were like prisoners that came out of prison. It was about an old Australian man. It's called the play was called The Great Pretender. He was on his deathbed, so he was dying in a hospital, and he was redeeming. He was telling his whole story to the nurse. He's never met the nurse before. So the Americans found that very interesting, but they also found it very different. The language is very different. So America and Australia are considered very close countries. They're both sort of rural background. They like the beach, they like the countryside, they like the cowboy theme, they're both the same. But when I brought the play to America, they also found it a bit different. So can you imagine Australians accepting, you know, people from the Middle East or people from Europe? It's not easy. But there are cities like Melbourne and Sydney that do accept a lot of multicultural or cosmopolitan people. But I guess the further out you go out of the city in Australia, like the rural areas, the countryside, people that haven't seen foreigners, it can be a bit difficult. So it's difficult to also implement your art, especially in those areas. But things like music, they like obviously different types of music, and theatre is also very entertaining. But like I said, you need to, the first thing, the bridge to collaborate between anybody or cooperate has to be relatability. They need to see themselves in the work or in the person to accept you. If you go to Australia and hold on to your culture exactly as it is and not want to change or assimilate or participate, that's when the problem happens. So I think Australians are very nice people, they're kind, but if you do not show, and I really agree with the fact that you need to show a willingness to participate in the original Australian culture. So the Australian culture is rich. You know, it's an old working class culture. It, you know, it likes things like ethics and hard work, and it repays you for stuff like that. It's a very working class, rural, country originated culture. I think there's an old movie called Sunday Too Far Away by a famous Australian called Jack Thompson, very famous Australian, and Russell Crowe's also Australian that did Gladiator.
Russell Crowe, of course.
So that culture is very important for people that enter Australia to know about. If they don't know about it and they go there and they just remain in their own bubble, that's when problems happen, and they do happen. We've had a couple of incidences over the last few months. There have been riots in the street, there have been some problems between the original Australians and then the incoming immigrants.
It's a common, I mean, it's a common issue with the original people, and it's also the same thing in the United States. However, it is a little bit more emphasized in Australia.
Yes. We've also got the indigenous people of Australia, so the original people that were there before the white settlers came in, the English settlers came in. So these were the Aboriginal, they're called the First Nations.
Do they live in certain districts? I mean,
yeah, then you don't
areas?
see them everywhere anymore, unfortunately. So you wouldn't see the indigenous people. They're like the Native Americans. You don't, in Australia, they're not common in Sydney, the main city, or Canberra, or in Melbourne. You see them in a place called the Northern Territory, which is on the top of Australia, or in the Western Australia. In sort of rural areas again, and desert. By the way, Australia has a massive desert in the middle called the Simpson Desert. It's bigger than Egypt. Massive, the desert.
Bigger than Egypt?
The desert is bigger than Egypt. It's massive, yeah.
This means it's massive.
Yeah, yeah. Most people live on the coast, on the beach, on the beach side. So, yeah, so definitely if you want to enter a place like Australia and do work like what I've done in art, you need to find relatability. You need to find something that matches the society, and then let them know that you're also different and you have different values. And that's the mistake that a lot of immigrants do. They go there, they disregard the original culture, and they just practice their own culture, and that's the problem. And you know, we've worked in media and theatre and directing. I've directed over 30 plays, and I know that rule. It's all about relating and giving them something that they're used to, and that's when they'll start accepting you. That's really important to do.
Generally speaking, is it a country that you can, I mean, a safe haven for immigrants to find job opportunities, to be accepted with, I mean, I could work on finding common interests with the people around me, but then I have to be accepted by other people for my color of skin, for maybe my accent. The way I could have my reactions to certain situations. So how does it work there?
Well, if you're talking about Egyptians have a great reputation in Australia. Most of them are engineers and successful doctors, and they work in pharmacy. So Egypt as a immigrant society or a community in Australia, they're very successful, very well liked.
It's a big community?
Definitely. We have 2 ministers in the government in Australia. Honourable Anne Ali from Western Australia and the Honourable Peter Khalil from Victoria. So they're 2 main, I think Peter Khalil's in Defence, so he's the Minister of Defence, or Assistant Minister of Defence, sorry, in Victoria. And Anne Ali, who was born in Egypt, her name was Azza Ali. She went to Egypt later on. She became a minister. She was a professor at ECA, which is ECU, sorry, in Western Australia, in counter-terrorism. So she's a very prominent person of the community in Australia. So Egyptians have done really well in going there and preserving their Egyptian culture, but also assimilating and becoming very successful. There's a lot of Indian community in Australia, and obviously Chinese also. A lot more than
Chinese?
Egypt. A lot of Chinese, yeah. So it's like you said, you need to learn how to assimilate a little bit, and there are opportunities if you assimilate. And learn English. It's very important to learn English. The first wave of immigration, main immigration, was after the Second World War, and it was the Italians and the Greeks and some Dutch, and these were like the white, considered white Italian, Dutch and Greeks, who went to Australia. They worked in the factories at the beginning, and now their grandkids, or great-grandkids, now it's like 4th generation, they own a lot of the businesses, they are the engineers also. But Egyptians started going into Australia in the late 60s, 70s, and a big migration in the 80s. And they've held on to professional careers straight away. More so than the first wave of immigration in the Second World War. So there can be opportunities. It depends on the willingness of the person, how hard they want to work, and to try to understand the culture they're entering. And if you bring
my awareness, of course, awareness of other cultures. But then, let me ask you about it's different dialects in the language.
Yes, I mean, great you brought that up. So can I go back to my play again?
They're very popular, sure.
Yeah, so the play
that's why I asked you the question, because of the, I mean, the language of the play.
language itself. It's like Egyptian Arabic and Tunis Arabic, or Egyptian Arabic and Moroccan, very different. So I wrote this play last year. inspired by a famous playwright in Australia called Raymond Mooney. So Raymond Mooney is a very prominent writer. He gave me some of his descriptions of characters. I took the description of the characters. It's very Australian writing. And what I mean by that, some of the Americans couldn't understand it, and that's good. They were interested in some of the terminology, you know, so the way the English is spoken. It's called colloquial English.
That could be understood by everybody.
Yes and no, it depends. So the English and the Scottish might understand it more, but the Americans might not understand it as much because of the way it's said. Okay, and the language of Australia has its own unique style. Like the word right, R-I-G-H-T, there's about 40 different uses of right, just saying that one word, just in Australia. But it doesn't translate to America. So if you say that word in America, the way the Australians mean it, it won't mean the same thing.
What does it mean? Is it offensive or anything?
No, it can be offensive and it can be funny and it can put somebody in their place. It can tell you to stop. It can tell you to go. There's all these different ways of saying the word right and having the meaning. So when I wrote the play, it was about the prisoners in Australia. A lot of the language of the prison language, the American director, Amy Feinberg, who directed my play in America, she was asking me, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And they both speak English. In America and Australia. And it was really funny because they were laughing and I was laughing, and eventually they wanted to find out what this word means and what are the terminologies for the football players and stuff like that, and what is the language between the inmates, the prisoners. They had their own language. Of course, it would be slang. Slang. So it's interesting to do work between cross cultures. I also did a really interesting play called Uberoi, in French it's called Ubervoir. 1896, written by a French playwright called Alfred Jarry. He wrote it in French, and then it was translated into UK English, and then it was translated into Australian English by Jason Kavanagh, an old colleague of mine, and then we brought it to Egypt in 2016, and a guy called Mohamad he translated into Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, and then we acted it in front of the audience in Egyptian Arabic. So it went from French to UK English, to Australian English, to Egyptian Arabic. And it changed. Okay, it's basically the Hamlet story. It's basically Shakespeare's Hamlet, but it was really funny.
Modernized?
Yeah, definitely modernized. Yeah, that we used the absurd theater and Brecht. And Brecht is very minimalistic props on the stage, just a couple of signs, like if you're in the forest, you can just say, I'm in the forest. You don't have to have trees and stuff. Different to realism. So translating culture, translating language is interesting, very interesting thing. And what I did realize is that Australian colloquial language is very similar to Egyptian colloquial language. So they're very similar. Egyptian Arabic and Australian English, if only they could understand each other. It's the same humor, very similar culture when they laugh. And the way they describe things, because I understand both languages, very, very similar. And I always say to my Australian friends that come, I just had a few friends here from Darwin actually to Egypt, if only you could understand the Arabic, you guys would be friends. But there's
just like the Italian and the people from Alexandria, exactly. I mean, they're different.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that we have things in common with Australian people, because
as
totally
soon as
different
you see
nature.
them, you know, they might look different or we look different. But if you can break the barrier
and the environment
of that,
also, I mean,
and the environment,
communities are
different.
different.
Yeah, exactly. You end up being the same. And I've been around the world a lot, and I can see that everybody's the same. We're all human beings, and that's what we try to do as theatre makers and writers. We try to find the human element in stories. So the last play I wrote was about the criminal. I didn't talk about him being a criminal as much as I wanted to find the human elements. I even was trying to look for the childish element in his personality. And that's what people like. People don't want to listen and hear facts and statistics about crimes and criminals. We also did a documentary, award-winning documentary 9 years ago. It was about a war correspondent that went to Iraq. Now, my team back then wanted to make it all about the war and his work in the war. And I said, that's boring, because the audience is going to look at that for 5 minutes and say, okay, this man has achieved so much in his work. But that can disconnect them from the story. So the best way to connect them to the story is to find the human being
inside him.
Inside him. So as cultures, we also need to find the human being. We need to stop looking at the differences between us. Your food is different to mine. The way your dress is different to the way I dress. Forget about that. Let's look at what makes us similar, and then eventually the differences are obvious. So I think that's a big problem with people, where it's religion or culture or even in art. You do it this way, I do it this way. You eat that way, I eat that way. No. It should be, hey, forget about the difference. What makes us similar? And you will find a lot of similarities.